So I have the privilege and honor today to introduce our wonderful speaker. I am so excited about this. Dr. John Salter is a PhD professor with Texas Tech University in Lubbock. And I've been looking forward to this topic about psychology and how it impacts our financial behavior. I want to gain a better understanding about how my emotions affect my finances, because I know they do. And the goal is to understand, to make better decisions by recognizing the cognitive biases that we have as human beings. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let John get started. Thank you so much for being with us today. And please go ahead and introduce more about yourself and go ahead and get started. Thank you, John, for being here.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I hope this will be a fun exercise. So we'll, as in the intro, we'll talk through some of the behavioral and cognitive biases and shortcuts and things we're just not good at mentally that really do have an impact on our ability to make good financial decisions. And I'm going to preface this whole discussion with, it's not something we can necessarily control. We can recognize that we do these things. Part of it is this is how we're hardwired. And so I find it a fascinating part of what we do as financial planners. So I'm also a partner and a wealth manager and an independent RIA where we do financial planning and investment management for clients. And, when people ask what we do, there's obviously everything with investment management, with, financial planning. But I say a big part of it is just helping control behavior, and being a sounding board and recognizing those things. And really part of it is that, I joke around that one of my team members is responsible for my wife and I's portfolio. And, people ask why. And again, it's because I have those emotions tied to my money where I don't have those emotions tied to clients' money, right? So it's an objective opinion. So I run into the same things. I'll give you a few stories of other people that do as well. Been with the firm since about 2007 and been with the university since, as professor since 2005. So been doing this a while. And like I said, this is one of my favorite spots of what we do. So again, why are we here today? And really it kind of goes into the hardwiring of the primitive part of our brain, right? So we think of fight or flight and avoiding risk and all those things are what we're going to talk about today. A little bit of mental math. We're just not very good at complex math in our head, not meant to be. So we're going to talk about, there's kind of two different pieces. One's a cognitive bias, and it's really kind of the mental math, shortcuts we take. And then there's behavioral biases, which we'll talk about things related to avoiding risks and those types of issues. And again, point of this hopefully is to better recognize when you're falling for one of these and making your decision. Your first instinct probably will be falling into one of these, but hopefully we're going to have some fun along the way. I have some questions. We won't do the poll or anything, although sometimes it's fun. I know how most people answer these questions, but when asked questions, just think about it and I'll tell you the answer. And most of them are meant to be a trick. And so you'll probably get it wrong, but it's okay. First few things just for fun. If you can see it on the screen, just said this has nothing to do with finances, but it just shows our mind does play tricks on us. So if you look at the lines, do they look straight or basically crooked, or are they parallel or do they slope? And so if you look at it real hard or maybe just get a glance at it, it does look like they slope, but in reality, they're all perfectly straight. It's our mind trying to interpret the differences between the blocks, and it skews how we're looking at it. Take a second, and if you're on the screen, this exercise is to go across each word, look at it and try to say the word and see if you can do it the whole way. And so you probably can. If you concentrate really hard, you can probably make it through. But if you go through it really fast, it's our left brain conflicting with our right brain, where our right brain is trying to say the color, but the left is trying to read the word. And so if you go really fast, a lot of people just get jumbled up with it. So these are the kind of things that kind of go into these issues. This is one of my favorite slides. It's the cycle of market emotions and how we feel as, you know, markets or your portfolio goes up and down. So starting on the left-hand side, you know, right now, you know, we're kind of on this slope back up, right? And so after the impact of coronavirus, so, you know, we feel optimism and excitement and thrill and euphoria. And that's typically when things turn around. The market always cycles, it's never not going to. And then we start going down this hill. So think of the start of coronavirus and the impact, you know, start feeling anxiety, denial, go down to, you know, just depression. And so, you know, the way we feel is that we feel good up here, you know, when the market's up. Let me see, you can see my mouse. Can you all see my mouse on the screen?
Yes.
So we feel really good up here, right? And so feel great about our decisions. When we get down to the dips in the road, you know, we just, you know, don't feel good. We want to, you know, get out of what we're doing. And so the problem is that in reality, the biggest financial risk is really at the top. If you talk about moving forward and the likelihood that we hit a bump in the road and it drops. I'll preface this with long term, any point of the market is good because long term, the market should be higher than where we are today. Long term meaning 10, 20, 30 years. But in the short term, you know, the real point of maximum risk is at the top, the opportunities at the bottom. It's always better to buy low and sell high, but our emotions cause us to do the opposite. And so when we feel good, we buy. Right. So right now, you know, it's okay, because this is the whole point of today. If you got scared and sold your portfolio, your investments, you know, in the downside of coronavirus, and you feel like it's safe to get back in now, that's the way we feel, but it's the complete opposite of the right thing to do. What we should do is have bought in late March, you know, and reap the benefits of the market going up. So that's one good example, and this is exactly how it works. But it's a perfect example of how our emotions cause us to make a bad decision. If we keep buying at the top and selling at the bottom, that's the fastest and easiest way to lose money and go broke long term. A lot of finance, not just personal finance, but just finance economics in general, has always said that there's always based an assumption that we're rational people. And so when faced with a decision, we're going to do the math and just take the outcome that provides us the most. And so there's a few pretty well-known, you know, professors, researchers in behavioral finance. One is a psychologist that won the Nobel Prize for economics, and he basically used questions like this to prove that we're not rational, right? So it takes away that basic assumption. So here's a perfect example. So scenario one, so I'll give you a choice that you can either win $80,000 right now, like bird in hand, or option two, give you an 80% chance of winning $100,000. But that also means you have a 20% chance of winning nothing. If you like visuals, I have a little bag with ping pong balls, and if you reach in, you pull a white ping pong ball, you win $100,000. If you pull a black one, you win nothing. So think to yourself for a second which you would choose. And so scenario two is the opposite. Rather than winning, you lose. And so you pay $80,000, or you can have an 80% chance of paying $100,000, or you get a 20% chance of paying nothing. So pull a white ball, you pay $100,000. Pull a black ball, you don't have to pay anything. Think about your answer there. And so I will practice my magic skills and say that you answered, I will take the $80,000 on scenario one, and scenario two, you're going to take a chance. And so most people by far answer that way. And there's a reason for it. Now, go back to that economically rational. If we were rational people, we would actually, in either scenario, be indifferent between the two. That would be the economic math, you know, university setting answer. And the reason is the expected outcome of having an 80% chance of winning or paying $100,000 is 80,000. So 80% times 100,000. And so what this is showing us is that we're loss averse. If you chose to take a chance on scenario 2, you're taking a chance not to lose, but you won't take that same chance to win, right? And so there's reasons for that we'll talk about a little bit. So kind of a lot of what we'll talk about today is being loss averse, just making decisions just to avoid losses. Whether you're a gambler or not, it could be a board game or anything like that. But we think if you ever stopped doing something after you've had a big loss, right? And so it's easy to think of if you're gambling, but we do that because that loss hurts. And so there was a researcher named Terry O'Dean that looked and said, what's the magnitude of what's causing this? And so what happens is, on average, the magnitude of a loss feeling bad, so say $100 loss versus $100 gain, the $100 loss feels, twice as bad as the $100 gain feels good. And so if you think about that with yourself, it's absolutely true. It varies with people, so that's why some people never step in a casino, because they're not the 2-to-1, they may be a 5-to-1 ratio. Some people, it might feel about the same, but in general, losses hurt more than gains feel good, which is why we try to avoid them. We're not good with estimating probabilities, and so we not only overestimate, but underestimate some probabilities depending on what they are. One of my favorite things to ask, so if you're in a room full of lawyers, you can ask, are you a better lawyer than average? And so mathematically, 50% of people should raise their hand, but it might be more like 90%, right? And so, we're not, we got a 50% chance of being better than average, basically. But too many of us think we're better than average. One big one, I think, from a planning side that we run into is the number of people that underestimate their life expectancy. And so I'll give you some numbers just to think about, but, a 65-year-old today would have a life expectancy of, around 83, 84. And most people say, I'll never live that long, right? And so the real trick is, and if you're married or, a partner or have more than one person that you're planning for, the chances of one person out of a couple age 65 of reaching 90 is 50%. And so that means the average life expectancy for one person out of a couple is 90, not 83, 84 anymore. And so that's a real important one to do. And when you start pushing in the 90s is when I always get the answer of, we're not going to live that long. And usually a good response is a lot of these things, you also have to think of the outcome, what happens if, and so from a financial planning perspective, I worry more about people outliving their money than underliving it, right? For my job, I would miss my clients if they died, but my job was done because they were still able to maintain their lifestyle. The horror story is going to be someone coming in asking, why did I run out of money? And part of it is we have to plan a little further out than what the average might be. We tend to be overconfident. So it's very well documented that one gender has more of a problem with overconfidence than the other. So men are by far way more overconfident than women. But what that causes us to do is say, I'm better than the average investor, better than, or I can do better than anybody else can. I can pick the best investments. I can predict the market. You can't predict the market. There's no way to predict the market. The things that impact the market are things we don't know yet. And so by virtue of that, we can't predict it. The impacts causes us to trade more often. It's well documented, the more often you trade, the more trouble we get in long term. And my favorite one is, I don't know about you, but I've never heard anyone that's lost money in Vegas, right? And so everybody's only won. But being overconfident also makes us look back and ignore those losses that it took to get to the gains, right? No one only wins at anything. So I put our good ideas actually Costas is one of my favorite research papers, and looked at trading behavior of people with Schwab that traded themselves, so retail investors, both in the U.S. and in South Korea, and looked at people that made trades, that were kind of active traders, and basically just easily said, what happens if you would have just stayed with what you had and not made the change? And so on average, that accounted for about 3.5% in returns. If the people had just kept what they had, it would have been 3.5% better, rather than trying to. And what people end up trying to do is, we'll go through a couple more instances, but trying to chase the hot stuff, and typically the hot stuff is already hot. You need to get the hot stuff before it was hot to make a difference. And so, and also from our cycle of market emotions, that's a big one too, buying high and selling low, just because of our behavior. So they titled the paper, The Cost of a Good Idea. And so I thought that was a clever title, but, and again, there's some overconfidence piece in there. Men are higher than 3.5, women are lower than 3.5. Representativeness. So we, to go into statistics and thinking of things, we read too much into small samples, and part of research is having enough observations to stay within some small bit of confidence that applies across the board. And so this is an easy question to show that. Which is the more probable coin toss? A, that you flip heads, tails, or B, tails. And so answer we're going to jump to is A, right? Because it's more diverse. But in reality, there was a 50% chance of getting each on each flip. And so neither are more likely than the other. Both of them are just as statistically equal of a string of tosses. Now, if we get 500, it changes a little bit. So a question here is for fun too. So Herbert was a part of a survey of 30 engineers and 70 lawyers. And so Herbert's father and grandfather were practicing engineers, and Herbert's hobby is building miniature villages. And so question, is Herbert more likely to be an engineer or a lawyer? And so likely you gravitate to engineer. It's said a lot. That's what his parents did and all that stuff. But in reality, the only thing that makes any difference is the first statement. So a survey of 30 engineers and 70 lawyers. So there's a 70% chance that he's a lawyer. The second is irrelevant. And so we kind of jump on this extra data here, but what really matters is this base case of data, just the proportion of engineers and lawyers. Familiarity, and so we kind of anchor on information we're most familiar with, and also kind of a timing issue. And so one common question that hits that is, what value is more likely to fall? So the overall market, or so I put the company for which you work for. It could be your favorite stock, or meaning something that's on an individual basis. And so people will answer, in this setting, the overall market, right? Because they feel more familiar with the company, when in reality, there's a bigger chance, there's more risk in individual stocks rather than looking at, a basket of 500 or 3,000 or more. And so we answer that only because we have a close connection with that stock. And it's just that emotional connection. It's not really to do with, actual financial information of the company. Availability is another one. So we remember what we remember, and then we overemphasize it. And so it all has to do with how easy we retrieve information. And so this was done as part of a study. So note, I'll emphasize this question is not in the dictionary, right? So take the letter K. And so if you take random words out of the English text, right? So kind of random words out of a book, so not out of the dictionary. What's more likely to, words more likely to start with a K? Are words more likely to start with a K, or have K as the third letter? And so think about that for a second. so I'm just checking my time here. So it's easy as we sit and think, we can think of more words that start with a K than that have K as a third letter. So the actual answer is random words from English text, K is more common as a third letter. But it's harder to go through our kind of Rolodex of words in our head. It's easier to retrieve words that start with a K. And so that causes us to overemphasize recent market losses or gains, right? And so when we're making decisions right now, when markets are back at a record high, what's on our mind? What we just went through in, March, April, and May. And so we overemphasize that, the market's still risky because that's stuck with us. Saliency, so kind of the importance we give to certain information, and then we happen to overreact to it a lot too. So that's pretty common issue in what we do. Contagious enthusiasm, just jumping on the bandwagon. I'm gonna skip to the bottom. FOMO is a common word. Fear of missing out, right? And so think back to the tech bubble, the real estate bubble. I got stories galore. I remember, so we have an office for our firm here and in Miami, Florida, and then we're starting one in Seattle. But I was at the Miami office once riding in a cab, and the cab driver asked what I did and told him, and he was bragging about, this was probably 2006, bragging about his condo that he bought and how much appreciation it had. Of course, he bought it 100% financed. And so, 6 months later, after that, Miami got hit hard during the housing crisis. But he jumped on it after the values had already appreciated. And unfortunately, he got burned a little bit. Bitcoin is the same thing. You can go back to the 1600s, there was a tulip craze. And so same thing with Bitcoin, people just didn't want to miss out on whatever it might be, but have no clue what it actually is. And again, this typically happens after, the market's already reacted. So after the stock's up, after the value's up, we want to join in. And if we go back to the original slide, hitting it at the top is the point of maximum risk. What's important too to think of when we say the word risk, it doesn't mean loss necessarily, right? And so there's a bigger risk of something happening. That something still has to happen. There's a fun one too, thinking of fear of missing out and contagious enthusiasm, but chasing returns. And so you have a $100,000 portfolio or your investment, whatever it may be, at the end of the year. So, whole year passed, yours is at 110,000, and you're talking to your friend and they're at 127. And so we had this as an exercise with clients. And so I'd ask the client, would you call me up and say, hey, I missed out on returns. I want to make a switch. And so think about that. So you're behind, 17%. Would you feel like you want to make a switch? You've missed out on something. And so if you say yes, there's a catch, because what's on the upside is also on the downside. And so rewind, your $100,000 investment is worth 90 at the end of 1 year. It dropped 10%, just like you gained 10 on the last. But your friends is down 273, so down 27,000. Would you still call and want to make the change? Well, of course not. So don't pay attention to what other people are doing. Stick to your plan. Have a plan an investment plan that's working for you and meeting your future goals, and stick with it. It's not always about just returns, because higher returns means higher risk that you end up on this side of the outcomes. Confirmation bias. I say we've all done this. I can come up with a bunch of examples in my life, but that we really only look at information that confirms our decision, and we just ignore everything else, right? So if you sit and think, I think my entire process of building my house was full of confirmation bias. That I picked the right builder and this, that, and the other thing. And so what we do is just search for, we maybe have an idea and say, I think I might do this. and then go to Google, put it in, and you're going to focus on the things that confirm that what you were thinking is the right thing to do. And you will put less emphasis and less weight into all the things that say, don't do this. So that's a good one to sit and watch. Really try to force yourself to get as much information as you can. Anticipatory regret. So we fear regret and we seek pride. And so if you can think that you've ever made a decision and you didn't do something just because you thought you would regret the outcome. And that's a common trap we fall into. So what that does with investing is causes us to sell winners too early and ride losses too long. And so at some point you have to cut things loose and not worry about that regret. It's actually, make it a good decision. If you ever find yourself in that predicament of you feel like you're riding a loss too long, rather than thinking that you own it, turn around and say, and this is going to come up again later, but turn around and say, if I had this in cash, would I buy this again? And if the answer is no, sell it, right? If you wouldn't buy it, you shouldn't own it. Just because you have it, and sometimes you need to cut your losses and move on. Anchoring is a big one. So anchoring is when we kind of rely on a specific piece of information to make our decision onto kind of one thing. We can always look back and say that was that reason. So similar to the previous slide, say you invested $1,000 in a stock and now it's worth $900. Would you sell it now, or is it in your mind, I'll wait till it gets back to 1,000? And so don't wait till it gets back to 1,000 if you think you should sell it. You're anchoring on the 1,000 original investment, but if you take an investment A and move it to a better option B, it's still invested, right? You're not, taking a loss. You're transferring it over into something else that would be there. So don't get stuck on that original value. I can tell you that's probably one of the more common mistakes I've seen with clients that have, we construct portfolios for clients, and some clients have play accounts on the side, where they own this, that, or other stocks that they like to play with. And I can't tell you how many times I've been told, I wish I would have listened to you, right? Because they were like, I'll wait till it gets to this and we'll sell it. In one instance, it went from about $90 to about 10. Lost $80 a share. It's a pretty big amount of money, but just couldn't let it go until I got back to that original number. So don't let that be something you anchor on. Another thing, it's common to hear there's some, book writers that still will publish, buy a stock mutual fund and it'll return 11% or 12% moving forward. It's just not the case going forward. Historically, that's true. Stock markets returned about 11%. Any of the, what we call gurus, economists, it may be more like 8 or 9 long-term moving forward. So, don't just look in the past, look forward as well when you're making decisions. Because in terms of, a financial plan or retirement plan, it's a huge difference if you run your numbers at 11 versus 9. The money's not going to last as long. Mental math I mentioned earlier, we're just not very good at it. And so I'm going to present you with a stock tip. I don't actually do that, but just for fun, got this hot stock for you. There's a 90% chance that the government approves what they're doing. And if they approve it, there's a 90% chance that the prototype works. And then if that works, there's a 90% chance that a regional test works. And then if that works out, 90% chance that the national rollout will be successful. So does that sound good to you? Would you invest in that? And so probably you look at it and say, well, yeah, there's a 90% chance, right? But there's not. There's a 65% chance this all works out in the end, because it's a 90% chance the government approves it, then the prototype works then. So 90 times 90 times 90 times 90 is 65%. So it's not nearly as good as what pops out to us really fast. So what's happening is our mind's taking a shortcut and saying 90% and not sitting doing the math in the background. This is a common one. So last year, you lost 20%. This year, you're up 20%. Are you back to even? And so easy math would say yes. Real math says no. And so you're still down about 4%. And so thinking of losing, the easy math to do is if you lose 50% value in something, to get back where you were, you have to have 100% return to get back, right? So you had something worth $100, lost 50%, it's now worth 50. If you get a 50% return, you're only back to 75. You'd have to actually get 100% return, add that whole 50 back. And so when we're, keeping up with our portfolios, it's not a percent per percent loss and gain to get us back where we were. We have to actually get a higher return to get us back to where we previously were. Going back to, statistics again, which is more likely to be a fair coin? So 10, you toss a coin 10 times and you land 8 heads, or you toss 1,000 and you get 700. And so the easy answer to go to is, well, 1,000 is 700. 700 is closer to 50%. So that has to be right. But that's not true. After you flip 1,000 coins, you see way closer to 500 than 700. And then we only flipped it 10 times here. It could have easily had 10 heads, right? But as we get more and more data, we know a fair coin has a 50% chance of landing heads and tails. As we get more tosses, we should be way closer to 50%. Answer temporal choice means, we have a trade-off of time and reward. And so another question for you, which would you prefer? These are just random numbers, nothing special, but I'll give you $3,400 today or give you $3,800 in 3 months. And so the vast majority of people will take the $3,400 today. And so what we're not doing is saying, what's the actual return on me waiting? And if you turn this into so that's $400 to wait for 3 months. If you turn that into an annualized return on your money, it's 45%. And so if I asked you, I'll give you an annualized 45% if you wait 3 months, absolutely yes, right? But we're not doing the math between the 3,400 and the 3,800 to get us to that point. And partly is we're impatient. And, this is also where, we have such a big problem with things like payday loans and easy access to money that you get a huge discount for, because it's hard to do that math in our head. Framing is another kind of fun thing to me. At the bottom, I said, welcome to marketing. So think about that as we go through some of these questions. But, it's the way something is worded will determine the outcome, even if it's the same thing. So if you're at the grocery store and there was 2 things of ground beef and one of them said it's 10% fat, the other one said 90% fat free, which one are you going to buy? Same maker, same everything. You're buying the 90% fat free. It just sounds better, but it's the same exact thing, right? So why would we want anything with fat? I'd rather just say fat free and we're good to go. Would you prefer a Chinese gooseberry or a kiwi fruit? And so they're named kiwi fruit for a reason now. They're the same thing, but they couldn't sell them as a Chinese gooseberry. And so they renamed them kiwi fruit. Now you go to a store, you don't see prunes anymore. So probably should take this part off, but would you like prunes or dried plums? Everybody would prefer dried plums, but of course a dried plum is a prune. But prunes had a negative connotation to them. So, that falls into what we're talking about, because that is absolutely used for marketing purposes, in our area to make things sound better than they actually are. One of my favorite things that falls into this is, they're an annuity. You've probably heard the commercials say this, but, participate in market returns with no losses. That sounds wonderful, but when you actually look at it and run the numbers of what you can expect long term, you might as well just pick a CD. It's going to give you about the same, right? But just the thought of, hey, I can have market returns with no losses, that's a free lunch, and those don't exist. Endowment bias is another thing I commonly see. We put a higher value on what we already own. And so very common with inheritances, people that, my dad worked at, mom worked at, XYZ company. I'm keeping that stock because I have an emotional tie to it, or company stock and staying loyal, and not being able to divest of those things. And again, always more risky to hold what we call a concentrated position in an individual stock than diversifying across more. And so again, another question, same question as before, but question to ask is, if you had that value in cash, right? So say that was $100,000 of that stock, would you go buy that stock? And if the answer is no, well, you have to get rid of that tie to it, because that there's risk held in that emotional or loyal tie. So what to do about all this? So first, again, know this is how we're hardwired. Know this is why, a lot of financial planners and investment managers have their own financial planners and investment managers, because it's that emotional tie that we have to the money. I think I mentioned the person that won the Nobel Prize in economics, the psychologist. We had him on a call with our PhD students at Texas Tech. And he gave an example of a time in his life where he fell for one of these pitfalls, and the students were just taken back and fell out of their chair and said, "But you're the king of this. How did you not avoid this?" And so his comment was, "You're missing the point. This is our brain and how we're wired." And so the only thing we can do is recognize what's going on, but first instinct is to fall for these things. So work hard to recognize when you're falling into these traps. Always gather as much information as possible. Don't stop with the thing that confirmed your decision. I promise you do way more of that than you think. And focus on risk and reward. Go back to the question about taking the chance to win or lose. It works on both sides. If there's a high chance of reward, there is a high chance of risk. That is just hard and fast rules of investment management. And know and understand the consequences of the things that you're doing. So, although it feels better to buy high and sell low, know the consequences are your portfolio is actually going to shrink. It's not going to grow. And so, you have to create a portfolio that you can withstand the ups and downs, because they're always going to be here. Coronavirus market drops, not the first time that's happened, not the first time in the past 10 years either. And so that's the way it works. And lean on others for objective opinions, no matter who that is, professional or friends or family, and, just somebody that doesn't have that emotional tie to the money to help with some more objectivity. The decisions we make about our own, other people may not. And so I'll end with a funny story, because I was told I was acting like a client. So I travel quite a bit to conferences and see clients. We work with clients all over the country and the state, and my wife and I travel, see family and vacation. And when all this started, I thought, there's no way we're going to make it, staying home all the time and not being able to travel. And my wife's grandfather was turning 100, but he lives in New Brunswick, Canada, and all these things. My dad was getting married, and so we went across the street and looked at RVs, which was just turns out not a great idea. And I had this rationalization that, part of it, we like cruises. And I said, well, we cancel the 2 cruises. We can go buy the truck and the RV. And if we don't like it, sell it next year, and all this, little rationalization to myself that I told this to I got 2 study groups, we just kind of help each other to get better. And one of the study group members, and she's like, "You're crazy. You sound just like a client." So it took me talking to her to talk me out of it, right? Because it totally made sense for us, but in reality, it makes no sense. So use other people as much as you can to help make those decisions. And I came across something the other day with Looney Tunes, so I ended it with "That's awesome." So hope you enjoyed it. I like making things, try to make things fun with the questions. There's my email addresses if you come up with anything afterwards that you have questions about or anything like that. And I know we want to leave some time to questions, so I think we have about 15 minutes till 1.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That was really very good. Does anybody have any questions? If you could raise your hand or just let us know that you have a question. There's a raise your hand button. If you push on the participants, it's a raise your hand is on the right-hand side there. Anybody with questions?
Or comment.
Or comment. I know I learned a lot. Thank you. You're so right. It's amazing how we do put our emotions and not realize it in every decision we make.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for being on the call. Again, if you guys have questions, please feel free to interrupt me. But I want to thank everybody for being on the call. We have some TMA, the physicians and staff, as well as all of our Alliance members. You guys are fantastic, and I so appreciate you being here. Reminder that next month will be the third Thursday of the month, and it's going to be on conflict of engagement, terminology and skills on how to how to navigate the real world issues. And Martha Howell, who's actually on this call, is going to be one of the speakers, along with Dr. Gretchen Fuller. Martha, do you want to kind of introduce this topic? Kind of putting her on the spot. Sorry, Martha.
I don't think she's available right now.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
but I do see that Agnes Ward has raised her hand.
Okay, Agnes, you go ahead and proceed and unmute.
Yes, thank you, John, for your presentation. I'm wondering if you could explain a little more in detail. Why is the market rebounding or doing as well as it is right now when we have such job loss, businesses failing? What is the psychology behind all that?
A little bit of, let's go back to it here. Where are we at? We're at, yeah, a little bit of this. I'm surprised by that too. You know, that we're back to a record. There's so much. So the one thing that's tried and true is the market does not like uncertainty, right? That's why coming up to the election, it's going to be bumpy. It always is. Not being political, it happens every time. Because we don't know what the outcome is going to be, and obviously things like taxes and you know, capitalism, things like that, you know, have differing opinions on letting companies be free to do what they want, or putting more taxes on them, stuff like that. So why it's where it is with the election risk and with where we are with coronavirus, that we're not totally open back up, you know, that we look and say, you know, it could be, you know, 6 months before we have a vaccine, and much longer than that before we take on, or, you know, before that takes effect, where we can actually kind of get back to normal life. So, you know, I'd say there's some optimism baked into it. And so don't take this the wrong way. It's not meant, I always preface it with what I mean by risk, but there's probably more downside risk than upside risk. Meaning, you know, the big things out there are the election and vaccines and or treatments for coronavirus. And so, you know, there's lots of optimism with the trials going on. If any of those come out negatively, you know, there's more room for the market to drop probably than to jump up. Doesn't mean the market's going to drop. Don't take it that way. Just so I'm not trying to use the overpriced word, but it's priced optimistically, I think.
Yeah,
and a lot of smart people. Well, a lot of smart people. There's a lot of people at home, right, that are, you know, let's go back. There's been a couple of things probably attributed to. Let's go back to our, you know, market emotions. You know, we're back up here, right? And so what do we do here? You feel good about getting back in. So there's people that got out and, you know, are getting back in. It caused a lot of people to stay at home. And so there's a story in the Wall Street Journal today about a company called Robinhood that, you know, on one hand made trading very easy, but, you know, as we said in here, the more you mess with it, the more likely you're making bad decisions. And so, you know, it allows people to get in and buy things when, you know, maybe they're not as experienced with what they should be doing. So I don't disagree with you. I think you can't control where it's at. I don't think you should go rip your money out of the markets or anything. Just, the best thing long term is to have that allocation plan between stocks and bonds, and you have to build it where you can ride through the ups and downs. And so, we had a down, we've had a big up, but there's still a lot of uncertainty out there.
I guess those investors have more time on their hands, so they're researching more and making those investments. I mean, unlike retirees who, have a plan, hopefully, in place,
Well, this allowed, that Robinhood allowed, right. Well, again, you just, if you're retired, you probably shouldn't be 100% stocks, right? So,
Right.
having bonds actually gives you a buffer. Losing, you only really lose if you sell. As long as long term you can hang in there, you should have a plan that's built to ride those ups and downs and still have a good chance of meeting your goals. What the Robinhood thing and people being at home, I don't think I think it's allowed the 20-year-olds, maybe the 30-year-olds that weren't in the market before, the time to sit and explore, and knowing things drop. So, you take a cruise company stock down 70%, obviously there's a risk. Who knows when we cruise again, but, people see these things and think there's value in buying those. Any travel related stocks or, those things that haven't done really well. So again, it's allowed a new group of people to get. Now, do all the 20-year-olds move the market that much? Probably not. But
Well, thank you for your perspective.
you're welcome. You're welcome. I do have a crystal ball.
Oh, no.
It doesn't work. I'll give you a fun story you all enjoy. So we have it as a talking point, when people ask what the market's going to do. We consult the crystal ball, and all it does is show what's on the other side, upside down. It's a very nice crystal ball, though. It's real crystal. But we have a big Polycom conference phone in our office. And at our old office, we had a corner conference room. And I pulled the phone out one day, and there was, about the size of a thumbprint, little melted spot on the plastic that was probably an eighth of an inch thick. And so it's thick plastic. And so we sat, and I was like, I don't know how this happened, because obviously it was melted. And so about a month later, Ann that works for me had a bag sitting on the table, and it had a plastic zipper. And she went to open the bag, and it wouldn't go. And the sun came in, hit the crystal ball, and made a prism and melted her zipper, and it did the same thing to our phone. So turns out the tool we use for predicting the future is also fire hazard. So but yeah, it doesn't work. Ouija boards, magic 8 balls, we've tried them all. They don't tell you anything. That's a joke. We don't actually use those.
Wow. Well, thank you again. That was very, very informative. I hope everybody got something out of that. I just want to say thank you again to everybody being on this call. It's really great seeing everybody. Thank you for taking your time away for your day and enjoying us. John, we just say thank you so much for being a part of us today. I loved your talk. It was great. I'm going to say adios, but thanks everybody.